Now, the party's Electoral Commission today revealed the rules and processes that will govern nominations and elections at its 53rd National Conference that will be held in Mangaung. The Commission's Chilitsi Rashitanga explained what happens when a candidate has accepted nominations for more than one position in the party's top six.
The Constitution of the ANC allows for delegates at the conference to nominate candidates from the floor. So if we run an election for a certain position, and because there are candidates who have also been nominated for another position, we will have to announce the outcome of that position and then go into conference to move further into the other positions, so that we can then give the conference an opportunity to decide whether they want any further nominations on that next position because of this provision that exists in the Constitution.
The Electoral Commission also explained how the vote will be counted.
Electronic counting or manual. It is very easy. We are going to do manual counting, not electronic. If you remember very well, the last time around, electronic counting was not accepted.
That was, of course, the Electoral Commission chairperson, Mochobela Siko. He was speaking earlier at a press conference. Now, to unpack the nominations and elections processes of the ANC's elective conference, I'm joined in the studio by Professor Stephen Friedman from the Center for the Study of Democracy at the University of Johannesburg and policy analyst at Africa Practice, Vugani Mde. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Professor Friedman, we heard the Electoral Commission outline the process around the top six if someone is nominated for more than one position. And of course, we've just learned that the Deputy President Kgalema Motlante's official spokesperson, Thabo Masebe, has indicated that in fact Mr. Motlanthe has accepted nominations not for one or two, but in fact three posts. One is president, the other deputy, and then of course for the 80 additional members as well. What is your understanding of how it's going to go down in the event that Mr. Motlanthe, doesn't change his mind and he goes toe-to-toe with Mr. Zuma?
Karima, just one word of caution. Whereas some people have actually said in person that they're a candidate, Mr. Motlanthe has not said. We had a situation yesterday where some of us were told he was a candidate. It turned out he wasn't. So I'm not prepared to say 100% on air that he's a candidate yet. If we assume that in fact he does become a candidate, then what the Electoral Commission has announced is a slightly different procedure to the one that was used at Polokwane, which they'd have to do in that case. At Polokwane, all six positions were voted on at the same time and announced at the same time. Mm-hmm. What they're going to have to do, if he does do what we're told he's going to do, is that they'll have to have a presidential election. If he's defeated in the presidential election, which is highly likely, they would then have a deputy presidential election and so forth. So they won't have them all in one go.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the deputy presidency election in that scenario that Professor Friedman had just explained, Vugani, would mean a three-way race, because we know that three people have in fact been nominated. Mr. Motlanthe, businessman Cyril Ramaphosa, and then of course Matthew Sposa went public yesterday saying that he too has accepted nomination for that post. Now, one of the questions at the press conference, which I happened to attend earlier, was about what happens if there's three people in the race, and how does it work? Does it mean that two of the candidates have to get 50% And what the commission explained was that whoever of the two gets the highest will enter the race. The third one will fall by the way. Mr. Posa going to fall by the way?
It's hard to tell between Matthew Sposa and Tokyo Sekwale, quite frankly, because the interesting thing about their candidacy is that having both of them on the ballot splits the vote for the so-called forces of change that are against President Zuma's continuation and therefore presumably against Cyril Ramaphosa as well, who's been nominated by Zuma's forces. So it's clear that Ramaphosa will probably get the most votes in a three-way race for that post. What happens with Posa and Sekwale is less clear.
But Sekwale hasn't accepted nomination for deputy. He's accepted nomination for Treasurer General.
I wasn't aware of that. What I've been told is that he's accepted for both.
I see.
Quite frankly, it's kind of hard to know what's going on in the Motlanthe camp. As Professor Friedman has already indicated, there are conflicting reports about what's happening with Kgalema Motlanthe himself and the race for the presidency. That confusion seems to be cascading down to the other positions as well. Quite frankly, all of them need to sort themselves out before the start of the conference.
Now, Professor Friedman, when we were at the press conference, journalists were quite keen to know when does the nomination process finally, grind to a halt, and it literally grinds to a halt on the conference floor right before people vote, where people can still in fact change their minds. So we can still have a situation where some of the candidates have accepted initially but withdraw for whatever reason. We've seen this happen before. What is the likelihood, Professor Friedman, if Mr. Motlanthe does contest Mr. Zuma and lose, as the numbers suggest that he will, contest for the second position, lose there as well, because Ramaphosa has got the majority of nominations in this instance. Does it mean Mr. Motlanthe's 15-year career in the top 6 of the ruling party comes to an end?
Well, in that case, obviously, Karima, it would. It's not necessarily a done deal. Of course, there is the possibility that Cyril Ramaphosa will not run. In which case one should imagine that Kgalema Motlanthe, if indeed he does stand, would be elected deputy president. But of course, if Cyril Ramaphosa does run, then one would expect Cyril Ramaphosa to win. In fact, if Cyril Ramaphosa doesn't win, just as if Jacob Zuma doesn't win, then a couple of thousand people won't ever be able to go home from Mangaung because they wouldn't have voted the way their branches told them to vote. And at that stage, yes, Kgalema Motlanthe, one would assume, would become an ordinary national executive member. I think that he's come to terms with that possibility. He was interviewed a while ago by one of the newspapers, and when he was asked what he would do if he didn't make the top 6, he seemed to have thought about that very carefully, and he talked about working with young people and with COSAS, etc. But I think that he's, he wouldn't be shocked if he landed up as an ordinary NEC member.
Now, of course, the focus has been on Mr. Motlanthe precisely because he's kept his cards so close to his chest, and we now know, if Mr. Masebe is to be believed, that he is indeed going to contest. We know less about Mr. Ramaphosa's intentions, of course, because he hasn't indicated publicly whether he is going to accept that nomination. There has been talk that he would be lobbied to not stand against Mr. Motlanthe for the position of deputy president. Is he a real candidate, Vugani, or is he a plan B for the Zuma camp that didn't want to be double-crossed by Mr. Motlanthe on the eve of the elections?
Well, that deal was contingent on Mr. Motlanthe being persuaded not to take on President Zuma. If, as seems likely now, that there is no deal on the presidency, then Mr. Ramaphosa comes into play, whether or not initially he was a serious candidate or a sort of a strategic plan B.
A stalking horse, if you like.
Exactly. Now it appears that he has been brought into play, because I don't believe that there is going to be any sort of late horse trading between President Zuma and Mr. Motlanthe.
Let's look, Professor Friedman, what Mr. Ramaphosa's entry into this race brings to the party. He's a very wealthy businessman. He's been certainly at a public level and at an image level dented after the Marikana massacre. He is a board member of Lonmin, one of the wealthiest men in the country. He's by no means an exception. The ANC is full of millionaires, both at the national executive level and provincial level. But there has been some kind of reaction to his status as a business person. Do you think this is going to be something that counts against him or for him at conference?
Karima, just to step back before that, I think this very much, to follow on from what Vukani is saying, I think this very much depends on Cyril Ramaphosa's preferences at the moment, what's going on in his head, etc. If indeed Kgalema Motlanthe stands, it does enable Cyril Ramaphosa, if he wishes, to step back and say, look, you've got an experienced person there's no need for me to do it. If he does it, look, I think there are quite clearly people in the ANC who are uncomfortable with his role as a businessman, with the fact that he, for example, has a substantial stake in Lonmin, which was a problem at the time of Marikana. given the way in which the factional politics are working out, I don't think that anybody in that camp is going to vote against Cyril Ramaphosa for that reason, because the priority in that camp ought to be to ensure that neither Tokyo Sexwale nor Matthews Pauza is elected. If he stands and if he wins, there's something else important about this which I think needs to be stressed. He will be the first deputy president to not have come out of the exiled wing of the ANC, people who were either imprisoned or exiled. So in effect, the UDF generation, the MDM generation, if we can put it that way, will actually have the deputy presidency of the ANC. And that is a very interesting shift.
Now, of course, Vugani, you have written extensively about the fact that whilst Mr. Ramaphosa has not been at the coalface of government, he's never been far away from power in the ANC. We know that he was Nelson Mandela's preferred choice in the 97 Mafikeng conference, where Thabo Mbeki, in fact, beat him for that position. What does Mr. Ramaphosa bring to the party in terms of an ANC ticket that prepares to engage the electorate for 2014?
In the main, it appears that what he would bring to a Zuma ticket is a very tarnished Zuma ticket would be at the level of image. President Jacob Zuma has a credibility deficit, particularly with people in business and the so-called investor community and the like. And Mr. Ramaphosa, because he would be perceived, whether or not this is accords with reality is not what I'm saying, but he would be perceived as a person who would be able to open doors in that community and speak directly to them and be a bridge between Zuma and potential investors and the local business community. Going into the elections, he would also hold out the possibility for a certain section of South African population that is also disenchanted with Zuma and the people who surround him. That Ramaphosa may in some way speak for them. In a Zuma cabinet.
Professor Friedman, do you share Vugani's sentiment?
Oh, absolutely. I think Vugani is absolutely right. Look, I can confer, from first-hand conversations. I mean, Cyril Ramaphosa is immensely popular in business. They feel comfortable with him. I think it's partly because he is a business person, although you've got to remember that, like Tokyo Sexwale, he's a very political business person. Yes. And I think also this fact that he is part of the UDF, MDM, internal generation, the whole culture is different. I mean, the culture
more
of exile, the culture, well, it's more comfortable. Business people are more comfortable with somebody who grew up in that kind of environment than they are with somebody who spent most of their adult lives in the camps in Lusaka fighting a guerrilla war for all sorts of cultural reasons. So he would be, it's this interesting situation where I think that there are a whole lot of things which, if Mr. Zuma says to business, are dismissed. I think if Cyril Ramaphosa said those same things to business, they would get taken seriously even if they didn't agree with it. So he would be a very important asset to the government and to the president in that sense.
Let's just look at whose careers can come crashing to an end depending on the outcome of Mangaung. We have spoken a bit about the deputy president, that if the result is reflected by the kind of nomination results that we've seen, Mr. Motlanthe is likely to be out. Who after him will be the biggest loser, Vugani?
While Mr. Motlanthe may be a significant loser, he does have the advantage of a reputation in the ANC that is built on decades of being known as a conciliator and as a sort of elder brother in the alliance and in the ANC, and so there would always probably be a place for him in the ANC. One has to worry about the futures of the likes of Matthews Pauza, who is seen as being at the center of the factional politics that has emerged over the last three or so years. If he fails to hold on to his position or to get the position that he has accepted nomination for, and presumably also is not re-elected into the NEC, then quite frankly, I think that would be it would be curtains for him.
Mr. Professor Friedman, last words from you, particularly around the potential of a change in cabinet if the NEC, is substantially changed. We hear names like Praveen Gordhan, Ibrahim Patel, Rob Davies, key members in the Zuma cabinet, part of the economic cluster, not currently members of the NEC, but apparently names in the list for additionals. If they should make it onto the list, are we likely to see, people like Fikile Mbalula and others like Tokyo Sexwale removed from cabinet? What are the potential cabinet reshuffle implications here?
Karima, I think this is a very important test of Jacob Zuma's leadership. He has a reputation for being a conciliator. He has a reputation for keeping all the factions on board. He understands that. This is the first time he's in a position where he, in effect, is going to have to decide the political future of people who opposed him at the election. He has the option of offering Kgalema Motlanthe a cabinet post. He has the option of offering Matthews Pauser a post. So I will be looking very closely. I mean, if you look at his track record as a conciliator, you would expect him to reach out to that section of the ANC and to make sure that at least a couple of those people who we mentioned are in the cabinet. If he doesn't do that, then his leadership is moving in a very different direction, and I think that that's going to create some very interesting tensions within the ANC.
Gentlemen, of course, we can be talking about this all the time, but we have to leave it there. That was Professor Stephen Friedman from the Centre for the Study of Democracy at the University of Johannesburg and policy analyst at Africa Practice, Vugani Mde, discussing the ANC's upcoming national conference to be held on December 16th in Mangaung.